Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 35 of the regular season for the San Jose Sharks as they took on the Colorado Avalanche and lost by a score of 4-2. And this was an interesting game because it was just over a week ago when these two teams were actually trading partners, as the Sharks sent over Mackenzie Blackwood and got back a couple of draft picks, Nikolai Kovalenko and Alexander Georgiev. And in this game here tonight, these two goalies went head-to-head against their former teams, and as was already quite known when the trade was made, but was further confirmed here tonight, it's quite clear that the Avalanche ended up with the better goalie in this player-for-player swap, as Blackwood was his usual very solid self. He didn't have to be outstanding, but a performance that many Sharks fans have been used to seeing from him in the earlier parts of the season when he was with that team. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ice, Georgiev put up a very similar performance to what Avalanche fans are used to seeing from him, living up to his unfortunate nickname of Alexander Forgiev, as he gives up 4 goals, a couple of the softer variety, and ends up losing this goaltending duel pretty badly. Now, was the one major reason the Sharks ended up losing this game? Not necessarily. It's not as though they should have won, but their goaltending completely let them down. But he definitely was one of the bigger reasons, because the Sharks did end up playing a pretty decent game. Reminds me of the one just a couple of days ago against the Winnipeg Jets. The Sharks going up against a team that on paper is significantly better than them. Pretty dangerous scoring team from the Central Division, likely to be able to make the playoffs by the end of this season, a potential even threat for a Stanley Cup as well. And so the Sharks were going to have their work cut out for them to remain competitive, and I thought they did an okay job of that. Again, many of their shots were of the low danger variety, like that Jets game. As I mentioned, Blackwood didn't have to stand on his head to keep the puck out of the net here tonight, but he made a couple of bigger saves, like on Will Smith a couple of times, and to go, if he had maybe let in 1 or 2 of those to go along with the 2 even strength goals the Sharks did end up getting, maybe they could have pulled out a victory or at least a point in this game. But outside of the goaltending, the other major reason the Sharks lose here tonight is that they lost the special teams battle. Now, from a penalty killing perspective, the Sharks have been a lot worse in this area over these last few games. Now, one potential reason for that is the fact that their goaltending has taken a substantial step backwards due to that trade. Many people say that your best penalty killer needs to be your goaltender, and when Blackwood was with the Sharks, he definitely was. But with Georgiev here now, it obviously leaves a little bit to be desired, but that shouldn't be letting the Sharks penalty-killing players off the hook completely either. While they have remained quite solid at being able to stop zone entries, that's something that in particular someone like Barclay Goodrow does have a lot of success with. It's his major calling card as a player thus far this season, as there's not really much else to get excited about. But when it comes to actually defending when the zone is established by the other team's power play, the Sharks have struggled as of late with doing so. We saw on this Rantanen goal, those holes are opening up. We saw on the Jets couple of power play goals as well. They struggled with the speed and the skill that the Jets brought to the game. But this isn't the first cold streak that the Sharks penalty kill has gone through thus far this season. And more often than not, they have been quite good. They're in the upper half, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe not anymore, but they were at least a week or 2 ago. So I'm not too worried about that. It is the Sharks power play that brings me a little bit more pause. You might be thinking, well, statistically, the Sharks' power play isn't terrible. There are a few teams below them, and prior to this game, the last 3 games, the Sharks had a power play goal in each of them. So what could possibly be the problem? But it feels as though, while I won't say those goals were necessarily lucky, but maybe the Sharks were a little bit fortunate to actually get them. I mean, just looking at that power play goal against the Jets a couple of nights ago, Celebrini sending this no-look backhander that manages to make its way through Hellebuck. Is this really a repeatable type of situation? Not necessarily. But I think what is the major problem for the Sharks power play unit is actually Celebrini, and not because he's doing anything wrong, but that he is doing everything right, that it is actually causing the other 4 players on this unit to seemingly get a little bit complacent. Because already the Sharks are putting all of the eggs in the Celebrini basket to allow him to carry the puck and allow these zone entries to occur. Basically 75% of the time it is Celebrini with very little support who is tasked with carrying the puck over the blue line. But when the Sharks are actually established in the zone, you watch Celebrini and how active he is. When he gets the puck, he's trying to change up those angles. He's trying to move around to keep penalty killers guessing. But when any other player on the Sharks picks up the puck on these power plays, there's just none of that. And sure, obviously the skill difference is there. Celebrini is the most talented player on the Sharks power play unit. But players like Granlund, Toffoli, Wallman, these guys are no slouches. They should be capable of more. But if we took a look at, for instance, the Sharks' first power play of this game, we saw on the left side of the ice, Celebrini's moving around. He's trying to get open for a potential pass, a potential play, a potential rebound. But instead, it is Granlund, Wallman, and I believe Tyler Toffoli who are just passing the puck amongst themselves, playing catch for over a minute, nothing being generated, no seams being created, and it eventually just ends up with Granlund taking a shot that gets weakly blocked by an Avalanche player, and boom, half of your power play is already gone and killed off the clock. It just feels as though they're pretty much relying on Celebrini to do everything on the Sharks power play unit, and so these other guys are just sort of playing, oh, well, if we get the puck to Celebrini, I'm sure he will make something happen, which is sort of true, but you do have to at least support him somewhat, and these other four players just are not exactly doing that super well thus far. On the later Sharks power plays in this game, when they would get their chances, it was mostly, again, off the back of Celebrini, so something to improve that these other four players, they need to be a part of the solution here and not a part of the problem. When it comes to this game and how it played out, in the first period, the Avalanche were the better team for the majority of this first period, but as it went on, the Sharks did get a little bit better, started to claw back, at least in terms of shots, but it would be the Avalanche who would have the only goal of the first, coming from Nishushkin. In the second period, as has been the case for each of these last few games, the Sharks, the second period was their best of the game. They not only get the game-tying goal from Carl Grundstrom, his first of the season, but also the go-ahead goal from William Eklund, his sixth, and it is a 2-1 game after 40 minutes. Now, in the two previous games, the Sharks had come into the third period in a tie game, then would get the lead just a few minutes into it before blowing it and losing the game in regulation. Well, in here tonight, they decide to cut out the middleman. They actually come into the third period with the lead and then blow it in regulation anyway, as it comes with a Rantanen power play goal that ties it up at 2, and then 2 even strength goals, both coming from Kiviranta, and it is a 4-2 loss, as I said, for the Sharks. Moving on to the players to talk about, we have the top line of Zetterlund, Granlund, and Goodrow. So these three players maintained as a line for whatever reason, and I again will consider them the Sharks' top line for this game. Not because that they have the biggest names here. I would still say that offensively, Celebrini, Toffoli, and Kovalenko are the Sharks' top line, but because they are getting the top line matchups. Last game, it was against the Scheifele-Connor line, and here tonight, they frequently matched up against McDavid, and just as the previous game went, they got absolutely caved in. It felt as though almost every single one of their shifts was played in the defensive zone. They were struggling to keep up with what McKinnon was doing, with what Rantanen was doing, with what Makar was doing, which is not surprising. I mean, these are not the first teams that, this is not the first line that those players on the Avalanche have just abused on the ice from a defensive standpoint. There's a reason why McKinnon and Rantanen are two of the best forwards in the game, and while Makar may very well be the best defenseman in the game. But the thing is that they also got caved in last game against the Jets top line, which is good. You know, Scheifele and Connor are great players, but they're not necessarily so much better than most other first lines, at least of some of the better teams in the NHL. So the fact is that this is again a game in which these three players together as a line got completely destroyed on the ice. Something does need to be changed. Obviously, the easy solution is to remove Barclay Goodrow. Is that really something that's actually going to fix this problem for the Sharks? I'm not entirely sure. Obviously, he's not helping much offensively, but he's not a huge liability defensively either. It's just generally a situation where they're just having a lot of struggles there, and it's not going to get better going into next game. Not only do the Sharks not actually have the choice of matchup because their next game is on the road, but they're going up against the Oilers, and if we thought, McKinnon was tough to handle, who is maybe the second best player in the league, the best player in the league is likely Connor McDavid. There's really not much of a contest actually about it, and as such, you're going to be caved in as well in those situations too. So the Sharks need to get better in those areas for sure, and there really isn't much to say individually from any of these three players because they, again, were playing pretty much entirely in the defensive zone. When it comes to the Sharks' second line, we have Celebrini, Toffoli, and Kovalenko. Once again, to start off with Macklin Celebrini, he was, lighting it up. He was making the fantastic plays. That moment along the wall where I believe it was Sam Girard, where he completely embarrassed in a way as he passes the puck to himself off the boards and then skates into it to the middle of the ice to get this chance on net. Just a fantastic play from Celebrini. You're not going to see anybody else on the San Jose Shark be able to do anything remotely close to that, it feels like. like. He is just that special of a player. He was getting those chances as well on the Sharks power play. He had a great look in the first period on a backhand opportunity with Cale Makar draped all over him. It was generally another solid game for Celebrini. Maybe didn't have quite the openings as previously, but he was creating those options for himself. He even drew another penalty, I believe maybe even another couple of penalties here tonight. So again, forcing the other team to have to take these infractions against him. And so there really isn't all that much negative to be said about Celebrini. He was again one of the Sharks' most effective forwards as per usual. When it comes to his two line mates, however, it was a slight step back. In particular, I would say for Tyler Toffoli, who I don't think actually had the best of nights here. I have talked about how Toffoli has looked a lot better over these last couple of weeks. Here tonight just was not his game. It just felt as though he didn't really get into it. He managed to get like a couple of chances. We also got to see him bank this one in off of his hand as he goes right over the shoulder of Mackenzie Blackwood late in the third period to get a goal that is immediately called off for very obvious reasons. But besides that, he didn't really get to find many openings in this particular game, and so not the best performance for him. Hopefully that's just a one-of and he can get back to what he was doing before. And then when it comes to Kovalenko, we still did get to see a few nice passes from Kovalenko, as has been done in the past. I was, however, expecting a slightly better performance simply because he was going up against his former team. Usually that is something that gives players a little bit of extra juice and motivation to put up a strong performance. Kovalenko here I thought was okay, but maybe not as good as he has been these last couple of games. When it comes to the Sharks' third line, we again have Smith, Wenberg, and Eklund. And I'm going to start off with Will Smith and use this as an opportunity to actually discuss the third goal scored here by the Colorado Avalanche, because this is actually the last we see of Smith on the ice in this game, if I'm not mistaken. I don't believe he actually got an opportunity in the 6-on-5 spot for the San Jose Sharks, and so it ends up being the last 6 or 7 minutes of this game that he misses out on. But I actually don't think this was really Will Smith's fault. It starts off, of course, ultimately with Georgiev. This was a weak goal. This was one he absolutely should have been able to have. But if we go back to the forwards and how this rush chance immediately materializes, it's very easy to point fingers at Will Smith because he ultimately makes the giveaway that leads to the chance. But I would actually put a little bit more responsibility onto Nikolai Kovalenko. I talked about in my previous game that Kovalenko is someone who seemingly does not like to play with the puck on his stick. When he gets it, he wants to immediately make it the pass, make a play with it, which is perfectly fine, but you have to pick and choose the moments to do so. This was not one of them because the Sharks' power play was actually expiring here, and he makes the play up the middle and puts Smith in a really impossible situation because he's got one Avalanche player in front of him, and he's got one coming behind him as well, Nichushkin, right out of the box. And so Smith tries pretty much the only play he can, which is to get the puck out of pressure to a Sharks player. It ends up getting picked off by Nichushkin and creates this opportunity the other way. But again, it is because he is handcuffed by this poor pass from Kovalenko. But ultimately, not Smith, not Kovalenko. I'm actually putting a lot of the blame here onto Ryan Warsofsky because he is the one who sends out these 4 forwards and 1 defenseman with only about 20 to 30 seconds to go on this Sharks power play, which is not a terrible move normally. But late in the third period in a tie game, I was very surprised to see Warsofsky not go with just 2 defensemen and 3 forwards. You don't really need a goal here in a tie game. You should be more or less fine with sort of playing this out quite safely. And yet for whatever reason, he tries to play it quite aggressively. And then, one, you could sort of blame Will Smith. You could sort of blame Kovalenko for not having the awareness of the Sharks power play expiring. But maybe there's just a lack of communication here as well, because usually when a Sharks power play is running out and the Sharks have their 4-1 setup, they will have Will Smith peel off the ice and bring on a second defenseman. But for whatever reason, Will Smith was not doing that. Now, is that Smith's fault? Maybe, maybe not. We will never really know. It could also, however, be the communication lacking from maybe the goaltender who's not slamming his stick on the ice. I can't remember if that actually did occur, or perhaps the bench not really letting them know, because this was a situation in which Smith should have likely peeled off in that spot. But I think Warsofsky needs to be able to make a smarter choice there. With all of that being said, the point of that sort of tangent, I guess, was to say that I don't fully blame Smith for that goal, even if it does lead to his benching for the rest of this game. Otherwise, I actually thought Smith, while not quite at the level that he was in the previous game against Winnipeg, he actually did still have a few chances. He had probably some of the best chances that the Sharks had as a whole in this game. The great opportunity on the 2-on-1 with William Eklund. Then he had a great chance later on a Sharks power play as well. So that was nice to see, and I thought he continued to have really strong developing chemistry with both Wenberg and William Eklund, who I actually thought was perhaps one of the Sharks, if not the best forward for the Sharks here tonight. Eklund was playing with a lot of jump, a lot of jam. He scores this goal, which was a nice one, just sort of takes a wild swing at the net. Also was the one who actually sort of sticks this one out of the air, which caught the eyes of the referee and the Colorado Avalanche to try and review this for a goal that would potentially be called back. But Eklund defensively as well, I liked his jump to try and be able to intercept these passes, intercept these plays. We saw him do that actually multiple times throughout this game, and so I thought he was definitely one of the Sharks' better players. When it comes to Alex Wenberg, I also did enjoy Wenberg's performance as per usual, as has been the case for pretty much 35 out of 35 games, maybe like 33 out of 35. He's just generally rather solid, making decent plays defensively, maybe a couple of awkward moves here or there, which were not the best, but I still thought it was an all-right game for him. When it comes to the Sharks' fourth line, we have Grundstrom, Sturm, and Cunnin. Grundstrom, as I mentioned in the last game, he needs to be making an impact on this Sharks lineup if he even wants a small chance to be able to remain in the lineup when Kostin does come back and the Sharks have a more complete group here. And with scoring this goal, I guess he does do a decent job at that. He does, however, take that offensive zone penalty in the first period, which is difficult to come back from, especially since it did sort of ruin the momentum for the Sharks at the time. So it's kind of like a give and take here. But generally, I thought the fourth line was actually rather solid. Luke Cunnin had a pretty decent game, picks up a couple of assists here tonight. Nico Storm also looking pretty good. And so the fourth line, certainly not all that bad, rather solid in general. When it comes to the Sharks' defense, the major thing to talk about here is actually the one missing name, which is Timothy Liljegren, not due to injury, but actually due to being a healthy scratch. And this really came out of left field for me because I was not expecting this even remotely. I thought if there was going to be a substitution on defense going into the next game, it would be Mukhamadullin Doolin stepping out in favor of Henry Thrun. Definitely wasn't expecting Timothy to come out, especially since, we have watched over 35 games this season, Jan Ruda and Mario Ferraro both make many errors in many different games. Jan Ruda has probably been very bad for at least half of the games that he has played thus far this season, yet he has remained in the lineup consistently. And of course, Liljegren is not a perfect player. He's had mistakes, and in this previous game, he did have one major mistake near the end of the game, but Ruda had one in the earlier parts. Ferraro had a major one that led to the the Jets' ultimate game-winning goal here in this game. Ceci also had a big one. So for the fact that Liljegren is the odd man out did catch me a little bit by surprise, but maybe it shouldn't because, again, Warsofsky is quite infatuated with both Ferraro and Ruda. When it comes to the actual performances here, we have the Sharks' top pairing of Wallman and Ceci. Now, like I mentioned with the Sharks' top line of Zetterlund, Granlund, and Goodrow, whoever really got the matchups against the McKinnon line with Rantanen and Makar on the ice kind of got the short end of the stick and was put in a very tough spot. The thing about the Avalanche is that they are a very top-heavy team. This is not to try and insult their depth, but their bottom couple of lines aren't extremely dangerous, and so the defensemen who got to play against them had a much easier time compared to the guys who had to go up against the leading point scorer in the NHL. And so when it comes to Wallman and Ceci, who did get a lot of those tougher shifts, it was not the greatest game for them. Cody Ceci, I would say, when he actually got into those tight one-on-one battles in the defensive zone, he did an okay job, but when it came to general positioning on the ice in the D zone, trying to handle the speed and skill, obviously he was just entirely outmatched, entirely outgunned. It's not even necessarily his fault. He's just not nearly as good enough of a player to handle that. Even with Jake Wallman, who does have some skill tendencies, even he did struggles at times here tonight in that particular area, so I won't put a ton of heavy blame on them, but again, it's a tough spot. When it comes to the Sharks' second defensive unit, we have Ferraro and Ruda. And of course, this was a pairing that immediately on paper gets a lot of people nervous, because this was a pairing that the Sharks ran for the first dozen or so games of the season, and in literally every single one of those games, they were completely terrible. Not even one redeeming game that they ever really had at all, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I've really blocked out one of them, but it felt as though every single time they were just getting absolutely destroyed on the ice. And for whatever reason, Warsofsky decided to reunite them for the start of this game. However, we were bailed out pretty fast, as it seemed as though they only got maybe 3 shifts together before they were once again separated, and Ferraro ended up matched up with Mukhamadullin, and then Ruda dropped down with Henry Thrun. And this was a better pairing, I would say, for sure, moving forward. Ferraro and Ruda did not start this game off particularly well, but what it did end up kind of doing is actually sabotaging both Thrun and Mukhamadullin, because this was a pairing I was slightly worried about. I guess to tie into the third defensive pairing, this was a pairing I was slightly worried about. 2 younger guys. Thrun has been very inconsistent this season. Mukhamadullin did not play particularly well against the Jets last game, and now going up against Colorado is not that much of an easier time here. And yet, they were really, really great to start this game. They were playing extremely aggressive. They were limiting the Avalanche's ability to even enter the zone in the first place. Both of them stepping up very smartly in the neutral zone, limiting chances. So I really, really liked their first few shifts, but then once they got separated, things slowed down slightly. The new defensive pairing of Thrun and Ruda was still quite good. In fact, I thought this was Thrun one of his best games of the entire season, which is nice to see with him stepping back into the lineup for this one. So that will likely secure his spot moving forward. When it comes to Jan Ruda, I also thought he did improve somewhat once he was also matched with Henry Thrun. Not quite at Thrun's level, but relatively close to it. A decent game for him. It was Ferraro Mukhamadullin who did struggle a little bit at times. Mukhamadullin in particular, he started this game off, as I said, exceptionally well, but then slowly went down. I still think it was a better all-around game than yesterday or the other night against the Winnipeg Jets, but not amazing. It'll be interesting to see if going into next game against the Edmonton Oilers, if Mukhamadullin ends up losing his spot back with Liljegren. I'd be very surprised if Liljegren is a healthy scratch for more than just the one game, and I don't think Henry Thrun after this performance is stepping out, and as we know, Warsofsky's not going to be penalizing Ferraro for anything, so it is likely Mukhamadullin who will be the odd man out for that next game. And then we get to the Sharks goaltender. I already talked about Georgiev earlier on. He was not great here tonight. The first goal from Nishushkin, it's a tough one because you do have to react to the very bouncy backboards in the Sharks arena, and maybe Georgiev is not fully used to that, but you'd like to see him be able to get down and make this save anyhow. The Rantanen one, he doesn't have much of a chance on. This first Kivi Rantanen one, he absolutely should have, especially considering the position in the game. The second Kivi Rantanen one is definitely a little bit more difficult because of the one-timer situation, but it's also one he maybe could have made the save on. And so when you watch the other side of the ice and you see Mackenzie Blackwood coming up with some pretty big saves at times for the Avalanche in this game, and then Georgiev not exactly doing the same thing, it's a little bit sad, but understandable. The trade is still one that makes sense for the Sharks here. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Saturday afternoon game against the Edmonton Oilers. The Oilers have been a little bit of a middling team thus far this season. They do currently find themselves in a playoff spot, but not like heavily in one necessarily. But of course, they are still an incredibly dangerous team. Stanley Cup finalists from this past season. They have McDavid. They have Draisaitl. Draisaitl has been absolutely on fire as of late. So the Sharks will have their work cut out for them with this game being on the road. It could be a bit of a rough one, depending. It'll be interesting to see which goaltender gets the start. I'd be very surprised to see Georgiev back in between the pipes, so we might actually get to see Askarov have his first very, very big test of his NHL career, most likely. Class dismissed.